Have you ever witnessed the breathtaking rise of a woman, scorned a dramatic fall of a once powerful man, and the shocking secrets hidden behind closed doors? In this gripping story, you'll be plunged into the scandalous world of Jonathan Cole, a millionaire whose arrogance and contempt for his pregnant wife Samantha fuel a chain reaction of heartbreak and revenge. But when fate gives Samantha an unexpected chance to transform herself and claim everything she deserves, Jonathan is forced to confront the consequences of his actions. Prepare for jaw-dropping twists, nail-biting confrontations, and an ending that will leave you speechless. Let's begin. Jonathan Cole was not always a cruel man, at least not in public. In the early days of his rise to success, he cultivated an image of a friendly, ambitious young businessman. Born in a modest neighborhood of Maplewood, he worked his way through college waiting tables and taking freelance coding jobs until he finally established Coletech, a technology consulting firm. By the time he was 29, Jonathan was a millionaire, featured in local business magazines as a fresh face in the tech world. His parents, Martha and Robert Cole, couldn't have been prouder. Amid his hectic schedule, Jonathan met Samantha Lester through a mutual acquaintance named Linda Marshall. Linda was the kind of friend who always tried to do the right thing, especially for people she cared about. She believed that Samantha, her shy but brilliant college roommate, would be a perfect match for Jonathan, someone who could keep him grounded. Samantha was working at a local charity, feeding homeless families, raising funds for children's hospital wings, and drafting strategic marketing proposals to attract sponsors. When Jonathan and Samantha first met at a charity gala, Linda organized sparks didn't necessarily fly in the romantic sense. Samantha was unassuming with a face too round for conventional beauty standards and a tendency to hide behind ill-fitting dresses. However, she possessed a warmth and gentle spirit that drew Jonathan's attention. On their first date, they talked for hours about each other's aspirations. Samantha spoke earnestly of her passion for helping the underprivileged, while Jonathan boasted of his accomplishments and plans for dominating the tech market. Their worlds seemed different, but for a brief moment, they found a middle ground. In truth, Jonathan recognized Samantha's heart of gold and believed having a compassionate woman by his side might bring him good PR. And Samantha, ever the dreamer, hoped her kind nature might soften Jonathan's growing arrogance, or at least help channel his ambition into benevolent endeavors. After only 6 months of dating, Jonathan proposed. Samantha was swept away by the excitement, ignoring the subtle twinges in her heart that told her Jonathan's love might be conditional. The lavish wedding took place at the Maplewood Grand Hotel, attended by Linda Jonathan's high society friends and the entire Cole family. Their first year was oddly tranquil. Jonathan was often away on business, which left Samantha alone at home to spend her days volunteering. She believed that eventually they would synchronize their dreams and become a power couple that wielded wealth and compassion. But slowly, the cracks began to appear. Jonathan's compliments became fewer, replaced by dismissive remarks about how Samantha dressed, what she ate, and whether she was good enough for high-profile events. Although his cutting words pricked her self-esteem, she brushed them aside as mere stress from his expanding empire. They lived in a grand penthouse in downtown Maplewood with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unrivaled view of the city. Samantha tried to make this place feel like home, filling rooms with handmade quilts, vases of fresh lilies, and the scent of banana bread on Sunday afternoons. But Jonathan never seemed to notice the small touches. He was too busy with conference calls, exclusive parties, and business trips to care. Samantha believed the warmth of her presence would eventually thaw his detached demeanor. Yet unbeknownst to her, Jonathan's heart had already hardened, long before they exchanged vows. The pressure to appear successful refined and unstoppable, began shaping him into someone who valued image over genuine connection. As he glanced across the bed each night, he found himself pitying Samantha's naive optimism and resenting her for failing to match his sophisticated persona. It was an unspoken resentment that would soon crash her world to pieces. When Samantha discovered she was pregnant a year and a half into the marriage, she was filled with cautious hope. She had always envisioned herself as a mother, someone who would impart her nurturing spirit to a new generation. In her mind, children would unite her and Jonathan in a way that no business venture or charity event ever could. Despite Jonathan's less than enthusiastic reaction when she told him Samantha remained hopeful, she believed a baby might be the spark that would finally make him appreciate her. Yet Jonathan made it clear he had no interest in fatherhood at that moment. He was at a pivotal point, with Coltech expanding into new markets and finalizing a groundbreaking deal with an international telecom corporation. The last thing he wanted was a wife burdened with pregnancy cravings, doctor appointments, and eventual motherhood responsibilities that would eat away at his precious time. Samantha's morning sickness, exhaustion, and changing body only spurred further distance. He might have said the right words in public, reminding everyone of how excited they were to be expecting a baby. But in private, he was cruelly indifferent. As the months passed, Samantha's body began to swell, and with it, her self-esteem shrank. Jonathan found every excuse to criticize her appearance, her fuller cheeks, her swollen feet, her maternity clothes that hardly flattered her figure. He would make offhand comments during breakfast, such as, "Could you at least try to look decent when you come down? My business partners occasionally drop by." Or, "I'm spending a fortune to keep up appearances, and you can't even put on something elegant." Nonetheless, Samantha carried on, determined to see the pregnancy through with as much grace as possible. She found comfort in Linda's friendship, calling her whenever Jonathan's barbs grew too sharp. One afternoon, while having tea at the Maplewood Botanical Gardens Cafe, Samantha confided in Linda that she felt she was losing Jonathan. Linda, worried, advised her to seek marriage counseling, or at least talk honestly with him about their relationship. However, Samantha clung to the belief that the baby once born would fix things. Perhaps Jonathan was just anxious about fatherhood. Perhaps he would change once the child arrived. But the tension never eased. At night, Jonathan often didn't come home. He claimed business dinners, company receptions, and last-minute flights to Washington and New York. Samantha spent many evenings alone, lying on the sofa in their penthouse living room, her eyes glued to the city skyline, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by marrying a man who cared so little for her. Whenever Jonathan did appear, his presence was overshadowed by an aura of irritation. The penthouse, so spacious and modern, began to feel like a gilded cage. As Samantha edged closer to her due date, her desperation to hold on to their marriage intensified. She tried everything. She took an online course on styling for expectant mothers to appear more polished, experimented with different hairstyles, and even forced herself to attend corporate galas while 8 months pregnant. At one such event, at the invitation of Linda, she wore a flowing champagne-colored dress to complement her pregnancy glow. She tried her best to seem radiant, ignoring the pain in her ankles. But Jonathan barely glanced her way. Instead, he spent the night mingling with wealthy investors, charming them with laughter and confidence, while Samantha ended up alone in a corner, her presence overshadowed by his ambition. In the final weeks before her due date, Samantha uncovered the first hint that her husband's disregard for her was morphing into something far more treacherous. While clearing the bedroom, she found a receipt for an extravagant dinner at a 5-star restaurant, complete with 2 glasses of top-tier champagne. She knew Jonathan had claimed to be on a business trip in Boston that night. Suddenly, Samantha realized her husband was not merely distant. He was blatantly lying. She didn't know if she had the emotional strength to confront him at that moment. She was 9 months pregnant, feeling vulnerable in every possible way. Still, a seed of doubt took root in her heart, foreshadowing the storm that was about to descend. Jonathan's mistress was a woman named Serena Fairchild, a marketing consultant he had hired to handle Coltech's growing PR needs. Serena was the polar opposite of Samantha, tall, stylish, and flamboyantly confident. She had a gift for social media campaigns, branding strategies, and presenting Coltech to the world as a cutting-edge, hip enterprise. Jonathan was drawn to her power and cunning from the moment he laid eyes on her. Their affair began as an innocent partnership on a new marketing push for Coltech. Late-night brainstorming sessions at the office turned into lavish dinners, which turned into secret rendezvous at Serena's high-end apartment. She was everything Jonathan believed he wanted, beautiful, ambitious, never held back by moral compunction. She knew exactly how to stroke Jonathan's ego, praising him as a genius, a visionary, a man who deserved a partner just as polished as he was. Meanwhile, Jonathan's pregnant wife sat at home, hoping her marriage would miraculously mend itself. Once Jonathan tasted the excitement of an extramarital fling, he couldn't stop. He was intoxicated by the thrill of sneaking around lying to Samantha's face, then enjoying Serena's enticing presence in posh hotel suites. Serena, in her own desire for wealth and social standing, saw Jonathan as a trophy to be conquered. She relished the power she held over him, knowing she was the reason he smiled more at work, the reason he left corporate events early, the reason he felt alive. The difference in how Jonathan treated Serena compared to Samantha was staggering. Serena received compliments, flowers, expensive perfumes, and diamond bracelets, while Samantha got scornful remarks and neglected phone calls. Serena, however, was nobody's fool. She had her own ambitions beyond just being a millionaire's fling. She considered herself a modern woman who never settled for less than she deserved. The moment she sensed any weakness in Jonathan, be it financial trouble, cracks in his social armor, or potential scandal, she planned to bolt and find another wealthy mark. For now, Jonathan appeared to be thriving, and she intended to milk this relationship for all it was worth. The day Samantha went into labor, Jonathan was ironically in Serena's apartment. His phone lay face down on the coffee table, ignoring repeated calls from Linda Marshall, who was trying to reach him from the hospital. Hours later, Jonathan casually checked his messages and discovered that Samantha had been rushed to the operating room for an emergency C-section. Anger flared at this inconvenience. Frustrated by the abrupt end to his pleasurable afternoon, he left Serena's place, with an annoyed sigh, grabbed his coat and headed to the hospital. When Jonathan arrived, the baby had already been born, a fragile, pink-faced boy named Michael. Samantha was still coming out of anesthesia, her face pale, her hair slick with sweat, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down her cheeks. Jonathan's first words to her were not of comfort or joy. Instead, he mumbled, "Do we really need to do all these surgeries? You look like a mess." In that moment, Linda, who stood by Samantha's side, glared at Jonathan with palpable contempt. Samantha was too weak to protest, but her heart cracked. She clutched her newborn son, whispering promises of love and protection. She prayed that Jonathan, despite his callous exterior, might soften at the sight of his child. But Jonathan barely glanced at Michael. After a quick phone call on his way out, he left the hospital the same evening to attend a company emergency, which actually meant Serena had demanded to see him. This was the start of the darkest phase in Samantha's life. The man who was supposed to be her partner during the most monumental event of her life had instead turned his back on both her and their child. In the weeks following Michael's birth, Samantha found herself in a painful haze of postpartum recovery. She struggled with late-night feedings, changing diapers, and the emotional roller coaster that often accompanies new motherhood. On top of this, she was forced to bear Jonathan's relentless criticisms. He complained about the baby's crying, about Samantha's disheveled hair, her inability to bounce back to her pre-pregnancy body, and her constant exhaustion. He acted like he was the victim forced to live with an ugly and lazy wife who no longer measured up. Samantha soon discovered that Jonathan was openly wearing expensive cologne, sporting new suits, and coming home at ungodly hours, often with the faint whiff of perfume on his jacket. She tried to ignore the betrayal, clinging to the slightest hope he might change. Linda, having witnessed Jonathan's cruelty at the hospital, encouraged Samantha to stand up for herself, to at least demand respect and honesty. But Samantha felt trapped, newly postpartum unemployed, dependent on Jonathan's finances, and deeply insecure about her appearance. Late one evening, Samantha overheard Jonathan in his study, talking in hushed tones on the phone. He called the person on the other end babe and spoke flirtatiously about his weekend plans. Samantha's blood turned cold. Though she had suspected it, hearing Jonathan confirm the affair shattered her. It dawned on her that this man, whom she had vowed to love through sickness and health, was far gone in another woman's arms. Tears streaming down her face, Samantha confronted Jonathan. She demanded to know where he was spending his nights, why he insisted on humiliating her, and whether he still considered himself a husband or a father. Jonathan responded with chilling composure. "I'm a husband in name only. You knew my ambition, my lifestyle, and everything I stand for. If you can't keep up, that's not my problem." Then, without another word, he left the room. From that moment on, Samantha realized her marriage was a farce. Jonathan paraded Serena in front of his top-level executives at parties, telling Samantha he was merely promoting Serena as the new face of Coltech. The tabloid rumored about a close female associate in Jonathan's life, though they didn't have solid proof. Samantha's status was reduced to that of a caretaker, managing the baby, the household, and the appearances at social gatherings. Jonathan's words, more cutting than any physical wound, left her deeply scarred. He seemed to resent her every breath, as though she were a parasite, draining his precious resources and social standing. If not for the baby, Samantha might have run away. But she stayed, ensuring Michael at least had a roof over his head and some semblance of stability. She prayed, lost herself in reading self-help books, and tried to shield Michael from the tension in the home. Yet with each passing day, Jonathan flaunted his affair more openly, even giving Serena a key to the penthouse. In those horrifying moments, Samantha would lock herself in the nursery, with Michael listening to footsteps and laughter from the living room, as Jonathan and Serena discussed marketing strategies, future travel plans, or even the possibility of a bigger home. The humiliation was unbearable. Eventually, news reached Samantha via Linda that Jonathan was planning to file for divorce once Michael turned 1 year old, primarily because Jonathan feared a scandal while dealing with new investors. If Samantha left earlier, it would have complicated his business deals. This was the final straw. Samantha knew she had to protect herself and Michael from Jonathan's cold, manipulative clutches. Gathering what little courage remained, she decided she would leave on her own terms, not waiting for Jonathan's convenience. Little did she know fate would intervene in ways she never anticipated. Samantha's turning point arrived during a particularly ugly argument. Jonathan had criticized Michael's cries, calling his own son a nuisance to his lifestyle. Heartbroken Samantha yelled back, her voice trembling with pent-up rage. She accused Jonathan of being a neglectful father, an unfaithful husband, and a cruel, selfish man. Jonathan, who was in a foul mood after a tough meeting, retorted with a venom that shook Samantha to her core. "You're worthless to me, you hear? I don't know why I married you. You're just a fat, ugly burden now." His words stung like knives. In that moment, Samantha felt something snap inside her. She retreated to the bedroom, tears burning her eyes. But amidst her despair, an unfamiliar resolve took shape. She could no longer let Jonathan destroy her sense of self-worth. Though she didn't know how she would manage financially, Samantha made up her mind to leave. She had some savings from her earlier charity work and a small inheritance left by her late grandfather. Linda had been urging her to confide in a lawyer named Elizabeth Johnson, a compassionate legal expert known for handling tough divorce cases for women with few resources. Samantha called Linda and asked for Elizabeth's number. That night, Jonathan was out, most likely with Serena, so Samantha locked herself in the nursery, lulled Michael to sleep, and dialed Elizabeth Johnson. Through sobs, Samantha explained her situation, the emotional abuse, the neglect, the infidelity, and her fears about raising a newborn alone. Elizabeth was both comforting and professional. She assured Samantha that the law protected her rights, especially regarding child support and alimony. She explained that Samantha could request an emergency court order if she felt unsafe, or if Jonathan threatened to evict her. The phone call ended with Samantha feeling the slightest spark of hope in an otherwise hopeless existence. Meanwhile, the cosmos seemed to weave a different destiny for Jonathan. He had become so overconfident that he neglected crucial aspects of Coltech's management. Between lavish parties, trips with Serena, and ignoring certain compliance regulations, Jonathan found himself entangled in a lawsuit. A small but determined competitor, Helix Sync Technologies, accused Coltech of patent infringement. Though Jonathan dismissed the claim as frivolous, it landed him in legal hot water, threatening his expansion deal with a major investor group in Hong Kong. Serena, upon hearing news of the lawsuit, grew nervous. She didn't sign up for a man who might be embroiled in scandal or face financial ruin. As the lawsuit gained traction, Serena began pulling away. She became less available for feigned business trips and took longer to respond to Jonathan's texts. Jonathan sensed her detachment, but tried to reassure her that the lawsuit was temporary. He insisted he would come out on top. The brilliant Jonathan Cole could conquer any adversity. Yet cracks started to form in their fling, revealing that this glamorous relationship might be as fragile as a glass sculpture perched on a ledge. Samantha, on the other hand, saw a narrow window of opportunity. With Jonathan distracted by his legal troubles, she could quietly collect her documents, gather personal belongings for Michael, and plan a strategic exit. She confided in Linda, who supported her wholeheartedly, offering Samantha a place to stay if needed. But Samantha wanted to stand on her own feet. She recalled that her grandfather had left her a small cottage in Westwood, a town about 3 hours away, near Lake Serenity. Though it was old and needed repairs, it was her property, somewhere she could start fresh and perhaps rebuild her life without Jonathan's domineering presence. The very same week Jonathan realized Serena was pulling away, Samantha silently packed her essentials. She took Michael's crib, her clothing, a few precious photo albums, and left most of Jonathan's lavish items untouched. She didn't want anything that tied her to him, except the child she cherished. Then, with Linda's help, she snuck out early in the morning, while Jonathan was out at a crucial business meeting. The penthouse, once Samantha's gilded cage, was finally in her rearview mirror as she drove off in a used car Linda managed to procure. Samantha felt a mix of terror and relief swirling in her chest. When Jonathan returned that evening, he found the penthouse eerily quiet. Serena hadn't answered his calls all day, and now Samantha was gone along with Michael. A note lay on the kitchen counter. "I'm done. If you want to find us, you know how to reach my lawyer. S. Jonathan stared at it, stunned. He had never expected Samantha to leave. In his arrogance, he believed she would cling to him, no matter how poorly he treated her. Anger flared at this sudden turn of events, but Jonathan was too busy scrambling to fix his lawsuit and salvage Coltech's reputation to bother chasing after a wife he believed was worthless. Little did he know the biggest regret of his life had just been set into motion. The cottage in Westwood was far from luxurious. A small one-story home near Lake Serenity, it had peeling wallpaper creaky floors and a musty smell that hinted at years of disuse. But to Samantha, it felt like an oasis of freedom compared to the sterile penthouse she had just escaped. She gently placed Michael's crib in the modest living room and opened the windows, letting in the fresh lake air. Though she had limited financial resources, she felt a surge of determination. If she could raise Michael in a loving home, free from Jonathan's scorn, then any hardship was worth enduring. Over the following days and weeks, Samantha settled into a new routine. Elizabeth Johnson helped her file for divorce, requesting sole custody of Michael and fair child support. Jonathan, preoccupied with his lawsuit and the precarious investor situation, surprisingly offered little resistance. He agreed to pay the mandatory child support, thinking it was a trivial sum compared to his overall fortune. He believed Samantha's request for a divorce was a bluff, a short rebellion before she came crawling back. So he signed the initial papers absent-mindedly, not even bothering to fight for joint custody. In his mind, Samantha and Michael were mere distractions he had always wanted gone. With the legal aspect underway, Samantha turned her attention to personal transformation. She recognized that her self-esteem had been brutally battered during her years with Jonathan. She was tired of feeling helpless and unattractive. So she created a plan first to take care of her health. She started by going for daily walks around the lake with Michael in his stroller. Then she added mild yoga routines and eventually began jogging once Michael could be left briefly at a local daycare. At first, the changes were small, a slight increase in her stamina, a more positive mindset after each workout. But something incredible happened over the months. Samantha's body grew leaner, her posture improved, and her once round face began to reflect a healthier glow. It wasn't about vanity. It was about reclaiming her body and mind from Jonathan's toxic influence. Yet as weight naturally dropped off and her muscles toned, Samantha found a newfound confidence she had never experienced before. She also sought therapy to untangle the emotional damage caused by Jonathan's constant insults. Her therapist, Dr. Margaret Phillips, encouraged Samantha to acknowledge her anger, hurt, and fear. Through guided exercises, Samantha discovered coping mechanisms that allowed her to process her trauma without letting it dominate her future. Therapy also unearthed Samantha's once-buried ambitions, her desire to run a philanthropic organization, to make a real impact on the world, and to nurture her passion for helping others. One day, while at a local cafe in Westwood, Samantha overheard a conversation about a new community center being built for underprivileged youth. The project was spearheaded by a civic leader named Carl Summers, who was looking for an administrator with fundraising experience. Samantha saw her chance. She introduced herself to Carl, explained her background in charity work, and expressed her interest in contributing. Impressed by her sincerity and past experience, Carl offered her a temporary position, helping to coordinate donations, volunteers, and programs for the center. Although the pay was modest, Samantha threw herself wholeheartedly into the job. Day by day, she managed tasks, efficiently garnered new sponsors, and expanded the center's reach in the local community. Her reputation for kindness and competence spread through Westwood. Soon, what started as a temporary gig grew into a full-time managerial role. Samantha also began leveraging her networking connections, like Linda Marshall, who had many contacts in Maplewood, to secure funding from bigger corporate donors. By the time Michael was a year old, Samantha's transformation was profound. She had lost the baby weight, plus some extra pounds gained from stress during her marriage. Her hair, once flat and unkempt, was styled in a chic, shoulder-length cut. Her complexion glowed with the radiance of someone who had finally found inner peace and purpose. Best of all, she was proud of who she had become: a strong mother, a dedicated philanthropist, and a woman who no longer cowered in anyone's shadow. Unbeknownst to her, though karma was steadily creeping up on Jonathan Cole. And soon their paths would cross again in a way that neither of them expected. While Samantha was rebuilding her life, Jonathan was on a downward spiral. The lawsuit from Helix Sync Technologies had gone from a pesky legal skirmish to a full-blown crisis. Evidence emerged that Coltech's software used proprietary code suspiciously similar to Helix Sync's. Jonathan insisted it was a coincidence, but the courts were leaning heavily in favor of Helix Sync. Worse, an internal audit revealed that Jonathan's legal team had overlooked certain compliance protocols, a grave mistake that opened Jonathan up to potential negligence claims from his investors. The stress of the lawsuit took its toll on Jonathan's social life. High-profile investors distanced themselves from Coltech tabloids, gossiped about the fallen tech prince, and Serena Fairchild, always keen to preserve her own reputation, seized the moment to end their affair. One evening, while Jonathan was venting his frustrations, Serena calmly explained that she was moving on to a more prestigious PR position in Los Angeles, and that their relationship had run its course. Jonathan was shocked. He had assumed Serena would stick around at least until the lawsuit blew over. But Serena was done. She had gleaned everything she needed from Jonathan Connections' experience and a taste of luxury. Now that his fortune looked shaky, she preferred to leave on her own terms. She handed back the diamond bracelet he'd given her, not out of guilt, but as a symbolic gesture that she didn't need him anymore. Jonathan begged her to reconsider to stand by him while he weathered this storm. But Serena, unflinching, walked out of his penthouse and out of his life. This double-blow loss of reputation and heartbreak plunged Jonathan into a crisis of confidence. Almost overnight, he realized that the woman he had discarded, Samantha, might have been the only person who genuinely cared about him, beyond his money or social standing. As he roamed through the penthouse, now disturbingly quiet, he felt an ache of loneliness. The city lights that once brought him pride now seemed cold and mocking. He found himself recalling Samantha's gentle laugh, the smell of banana bread on Sunday mornings, and the warmth she radiated even when he was at his cruelest. In his darkest moments, he regretted the venomous words he had hurled at her. But pride still kept him from admitting his mistakes. Coltech continued to sink, and soon Jonathan had no choice but to consider selling a significant stake in the company or facing bankruptcy. His once loyal board of directors voted against him, forcing him to resign as CEO to appease the investors. With his finances rapidly declining, Jonathan faced the possibility of losing the penthouse. His lavish lifestyle, designer suits, extravagant dinners, upscale parties became unsustainable. By the time he paid the settlement to Helix Sync, the attorneys and the mandatory child support for Michael Little remained of his once grand fortune. During this period, Jonathan hardly noticed the passing of months or Michael's birthday. His soul was consumed by bitterness, directed both at the world and at himself. Yet a part of him yearned for redemption. He wondered if Samantha could ever forgive him, if Michael would ever know him as more than a father who was never there. But he lacked the courage to make amends. In his mind, Samantha was still the docile woman he had tormented, someone unlikely to understand the gravity of his remorse. It was a sunny afternoon in late spring when Jonathan found himself in Westwood. He had been forced to take a consulting job after resigning from Coltech, working with smaller tech firms to recoup some of his losses. One such firm, Redwood Innovations, was located in Westwood, just a few miles from Lake Serenity. Jonathan drove a modest rental car. His once impressive sports car had been sold to cover legal bills, feeling an odd blend of nostalgia and apprehension. He hadn't been anywhere near Samantha's new hometown since she left. After the meeting, Jonathan decided to stop at a local cafe to grab a quick lunch. He walked in, took a seat by the window, and absently scrolled through his phone. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a familiar laugh across the room. A woman in a stylish, yet understated outfit was chatting with a group of colleagues. She had a trim figure, luminous skin, and a refined confidence that made her stand out. It took Jonathan a moment to recognize her. It was Samantha. He stared, hardly believing his eyes. Gone was the timid, insecure wife he had ridiculed. In her place stood a vibrant woman who seemed comfortable in her own skin, exuding grace and poise. Samantha spotted him too, her expression shifting from surprise to cautious composure. She excused herself from her colleagues and approached Jonathan's table. An awkward silence lingered. She looked at him, noticing he appeared older, more worn down, and no longer radiated the arrogance that once defined him. Samantha asked politely, "What brings you to Westwood?" Jonathan stammered about a consulting gig, unsure how to navigate the avalanche of emotions swirling inside him. Finally, he mustered a faint smile and said, You look great." Samantha nodded her thanks, responding cordially but keeping her guard up. Their interaction drew a few curious glances from Samantha's colleagues, but she quickly suggested they move outside to talk privately. They stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, the breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers. Jonathan apologized in a halting voice for the way he had treated her, for ignoring her and Michael, for the cruelty and neglect. His words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. But Samantha listened quietly. When he was finished, she stood there for a moment, her eyes distant. Then, in a calm but resolute tone, she explained how she had found a new life, one that did not revolve around him or his approval. She thanked him sarcastically for making her realize her worth. That said, she did not deny him the chance to see Michael. She believed that regardless of their history, Michael should have the opportunity to know his father if Jonathan truly intended to change. They parted ways with an uneasy understanding. Jonathan was left stunned by Samantha's transformation, regret churning in his stomach. He thought he might have felt relief at her civility, but instead, he felt something heavier, guilt. Samantha, on the other hand, found herself trembling once he was gone. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of memories. She had never envisioned seeing him again in such a mundane setting, or that he would look so defeated. Above all, she was proud of herself for not crumbling in his presence, for standing firm in her newfound sense of self. Days after the cafe encounter, Jonathan wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to run back to Maplewood, bury himself in work, and forget the pain of seeing Samantha so radiant. Another part of him wanted desperately to prove he could be a better man for Michael's sake, if nothing else. He decided to reach out to Samantha, texting her politely to ask if they could schedule time for him to meet Michael. Samantha agreed under the condition that the meeting happen in a public place and that Linda or another friend be present. She made it clear that this was for Michael's emotional well-being. She didn't want him confused by sudden appearances and disappearances. Jonathan traveled to Westwood the following week and met Samantha, Linda, and Michael at a local playground. Michael, now toddling around on chubby legs, barely recognized Jonathan. The boy was wary, clinging to Samantha's knee whenever Jonathan approached. Jonathan tried to win him over with gentle smiles and a stuffed dinosaur, but the child was more interested in running around, picking up dandelions and playing with other kids. Jonathan's heart sank, realizing the depth of the time he had lost by pushing them away. He felt a wave of remorse so powerful it made his eyes burn. Samantha observed Jonathan's attempts to interact with Michael. She could see that Jonathan was genuinely trying, but she also remembered the countless nights she had cried alone with their baby. She wasn't ready to forgive him entirely, but she also believed in giving people a chance to rectify their mistakes. Over several weeks, Jonathan visited Westwood more frequently. He would bring small toys, kids' books, or simply sit and watch Michael play. Samantha sometimes allowed Jonathan to carry Michael when he started to trust him, a milestone that filled Jonathan with both joy and heartbreaking regret. Outside these visits, Jonathan's life remained tumultuous. He struggled financially, living in a modest apartment back in Maplewood. He took on consulting gigs wherever he could find them, swallowed his pride, and endured humiliating rejections from people who once admired him. There were nights he nearly called Samantha in tears, but he resisted believing he had lost the right to show her his weakness. Instead, he channeled what remained of his determination into being at least a decent father when he had the chance. In Westwood, Samantha continued to excel at her job at the community center. She developed after-school programs for teens, art therapy for younger kids, and established a thriving network of local donors. Her relationship with Linda was stronger than ever, and she had formed new friendships with co-workers who admired her dedication and leadership. Occasionally, a nice man would flirt with her. Some even asked her out on dates, but she wasn't quite ready to open her heart again. Samantha felt comfortable focusing on Michael and her blossoming career. The scars from her marriage were still too fresh, and so an unspoken dance began between Samantha and Jonathan. He was desperate to show he had changed, that he was no longer the arrogant millionaire who dismissed her as ugly and useless. She meanwhile was determined never to let him wound her again. Each playground meeting or cafe rendezvous was tinged with lingering tension, past betrayals hovering between them like a ghost. Their interactions tested Samantha's resolve. Could a man who was once so cruel truly transform months turned into a year? Michael was now 2 years old, speaking small words, recognizing Jonathan as Dada, and hugging him tentatively when they met. Jonathan's consulting work stabilized enough that he wasn't drowning in debt, though he was far from wealthy. One sunny afternoon, Linda invited Samantha, Michael, and some friends to the Maplewood Grand Hotel for a fundraising event supporting children's education initiatives. Samantha was excited to attend. Her community center was one of the event's beneficiaries, and she prepared meticulously. She donned a graceful sky blue dress that highlighted her fit figure. Her hair was swept into a loose updo, showcasing her elegant neckline. A pair of modest heels gave her a refined silhouette, and a small silver necklace completed the look. When she arrived at the Grand Hotel, heads turned. Dignitaries, local politicians, and wealthy donors recognized her name from the charitable work she had accomplished. Some approached her to congratulate her on the success of Westwood Community Center. Samantha accepted each compliment with a poise that spoke volumes about her personal growth. Midway through the event, Samantha spotted Jonathan across the ballroom. He was standing awkwardly near the refreshments, wearing a slightly outdated suit. He seemed out of place among Maplewood's high society, many of whom now snubbed him for his past business failures. Yet when his eyes fell on Samantha, he froze. She appeared radiant, confident, and respected, a far cry from the timid, pregnant woman he had once belittled. A pang of regret jabbed at his chest so strongly he nearly dropped his glass. Samantha noticed his discomfort, and with compassion that surprised even her, walked over. Jonathan stammered a greeting, barely able to contain his awe at her transformation. Before he could speak more, the event organizer announced Samantha's name on the microphone, praising her for her outstanding contributions to underprivileged communities in Westwood and Maplewood. The crowd applauded, turning to look at her in admiration. Samantha stepped on stage receiving a small plaque. She delivered a short speech about unity and compassion, her voice brimming with the confidence of a woman who had conquered her past. As she left the stage, the applause thundered in Jonathan's ears. He was forced to confront the stark reality that he had cruelly misjudged Samantha, once calling her ugly, worthless, and a burden. Now she was the epitome of grace and achievement, commanding the respect of everyone in the room. His heart sank as he realized more clearly than ever that he had lost something priceless. He made his way to her side, managing a trembling, "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry. For everything." Samantha thanked him softly, but her eyes held a dignified distance. She had moved on, and she wore her scars as shining armor. That night, Jonathan left the event early, unable to bear the weight of his remorse. He wandered the streets of Maplewood, passing by locations that once symbolized his triumph. Now they served as painful reminders of how empty his ambition had been. He ended up at the penthouse building he once owned. It was under new ownership, its entrance guarded by a uniformed doorman who didn't recognize him. He didn't attempt to go inside. Doi Jai La, Chapter 11. Juok Viet Tiep Noi Lien. Machtu, Chapter 10. Trong Truyen, millionaire hate, ugly pregnant wife, and flirts with Mistress. But when she dumps him and shows up, stunningly he regret. Noi dong tap trung vau hao qua so sa kon joy voi, Jonathan su lua chon quoi kung qua. Samantha van hung du shan, quoi kung qua quok, taingo tai su kien. Jonathan couldn't sleep that night. After watching Samantha glow on stage, commanding a room filled with the very people who once worshipped him. He wandered the streets of Maplewood, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, heart heavy with regret. The luxury penthouse he had once flaunted wasn't his anymore. The club where he and Serena used to sip champagne had a new crowd, a new energy that didn't recognize his name. For the first time, Maplewood felt cold. He had expected Samantha's transformation to be impressive, maybe even dignified. But what he hadn't expected was that her strength would make him feel so small. The next morning, he stood outside her office at the Westwood Community Center. He didn't plan to go in, just wanted to see her once more, maybe catch a glimpse of Michael running down the hallway. But when he saw Samantha walk past the glass doors, laughing gently with a staff member, it hit him she no longer carried the weight of his presence. He was no longer a chapter in her life. He was a footnote. Still, he tried one last time. That evening he sent her a long message, more a letter than a text, laying out everything he had never said. His shame, his loneliness, his understanding now of how deeply he had hurt her. He told her he wasn't asking for a second chance, only that she know he finally saw the damage he had caused. Samantha didn't reply immediately. When she did, it was with calm clarity. "I don't hate you, Jonathan. But love, that died long ago. Michael will always have a father, but I no longer need to rescue you from yourself." Those words, final and unwavering, broke something inside him, but also perhaps began to rebuild something else. Over the next few months, Jonathan stopped trying to win her back. Instead, he began showing up for Michael, not with gifts or grand gestures, but presence. He read to him at bedtime when allowed, attended Saturday art classes, stood silently in the back during preschool performances. Slowly he became a shadow that no longer loomed but gently followed. And Samantha, she continued to rise. Her work earned regional awards. A state senator nominated her for a civic leadership grant. She was invited to speak at educational forums and women's empowerment panels. Even Linda teased that she might run for office one day. But most importantly, Samantha no longer doubted her worth. She still had quiet nights, moments when old wounds itched in silence. But she also had laughter, purpose, and the freedom to breathe without fear. And in that freedom, she made peace with the past. On Michael's 3rd birthday, Jonathan arrived early, holding a modestly wrapped children's telescope. "Will you stay for cake?" Samantha asked, as she opened the door. Jonathan blinked, surprised. Then he smiled a small, grateful smile. "Only if I'm not intruding." "You're not," she replied softly. "Not anymore." As Michael tugged him inside, Samantha watched the man she once loved, then feared, then left behind now, just a father, humbled, trying. The door closed behind them, not as a barrier, but as a quiet ending. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply healing so well, you no longer need one. In the ensuing weeks, Jonathan made a final effort to win Samantha back. He confessed he still loved her, that he wanted to be a proper family with her and Michael. But Samantha's emotional wounds ran deep, and her life was rich and fulfilling without his presence. She told him gently but decisively that she had forgiven him for her own peace, yet she had no intention of returning to a romantic relationship. What she was willing to offer was a co-parenting arrangement, so that Michael could have a father figure. Devastated, Jonathan accepted her terms with the humility he had never shown before. He enrolled in therapy himself, working to unlearn the toxic traits that once defined him. He continued to visit Michael, forming a bond, albeit fragile, with the son he once neglected. Over time, Samantha allowed him more visitation rights. Their interactions became civil, eventually bordering on friendly. But the line between them remained clear. Samantha had built a life free from his shadow. In the coming years, Samantha's dedication at the community center inspired new projects, including a scholarship fund for underprivileged teens. She became a local celebrity of sorts, known for her tireless advocacy. Michael grew up surrounded by love from Samantha, from Linda, and even from Jonathan, who learned to show affection in simpler ways. Reading bedtime stories, cheering Michael at Little League games, and being present when it counted. As for Jonathan, though he never regained the dizzying heights of his early success, he discovered a different kind of fulfillment. He took on a role as a board member of a small non-profit, advocating for ethical business practices, an ironic twist for a man who once dismissed morals in favor of money. He lived modestly, but with less turmoil in his heart. Each day, he carried the burden of regret like a silent companion, a reminder of the wife he mistreated, the mistress he lost, and the life lessons he learned far too late. Perhaps in another timeline, Samantha and Jonathan might have built a future together. But in this one, Jonathan's hatred for his ugly pregnant wife and his obsession with appearance and wealth led him to destruction. The universe meted out a fitting brand of karma. Samantha blossomed into the best version of herself, while Jonathan learned painfully that respect and genuine love cannot be bought or faked. In the end, he was left to reflect on the truth he once ignored: no one remains on top forever, and the heart you break might become the one that outshines you in the end. We hope this incredible tale has kept your heart racing and your emotions churning from the raw pain Samantha faced when her husband cast her aside to the triumphant resurgence that transformed her into a beacon of hope and success. Jonathan learned the hard way that money and status are no armor against the forces of karma, and that real love cannot be taken for granted. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to give our video a thumbs up. Share this drama with your friends, so they too can witness the power of self-respect, resilience, and redemption. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button to join our community for more jaw-dropping tales. Together, let's keep these real-life lessons alive, reminding us that every end can spark a new beginning, and that true worth always shines through in the end.